106.5 Low Power FM en South King County y KTQA 95.3 Low Power FM en Tacoma y Pierce County unen su señal para llevar hasta ustedes el siguiente programa.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Siembra. I know I look a little different. I'm not Yasmin. Yasmin, unfortunately, is not able to join us today, but if you've been with us very long, you might remember Pastor Dennis from previous radio shows once a month on the third Sunday of the month. Today, I have a special friend, Kris Smith, who we've known each other for several years. We worked at the same church for a short time together. And Kris is a woman's advocate and also an advocate for LGBTQIA+. Did I say that right?
Correct.
And she is a well-established author and editor. And so today we were wanting to talk about what the world will be like post Roe v. Wade. And so I thought he would provide a lot of insightful information on that. So this has been a crazy time for us as a nation, just all kinds of stuff. Those of you who track with American television probably have seen what's going on in Congress, all of the shocking revelations we have been hearing about January 6th. And of course, there's all kinds of other things. Any other current events that you can think of right now that you want to comment on, Kris?
Other than Roe v. Wade at this point, I could comment on a lot of things, but I think we probably ought to stick to one issue or we'll be here for all day long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously this is pretty young. So we're all starting to figure out how to get our feet underneath us with this reality. Fortunately, we live in a state of Washington that is very affirming of the Roe v. Wade decision, and is one of many states in the U.S. that are acting quickly to make sure that we are able to help stand in the gap for those states who are going the other direction. But it's interesting. We hear on the on radio and television about different actions that are happening, all kinds of demonstrations everywhere. We even have people who are filing lawsuits against their state for
Violating their religious rights.
Violating their religious rights, which is really interesting because until 1972, religion across the board saw life as beginning at the first breath of a child.
Correct.
And now only a segment of Christianity believes that life begins at conception. And of course, that whole concept complicates everything.
Absolutely.
Because now you have two people's rights that are in one single body, and whose prevails.
Mm-hmm.
Hopeful in most cases, we would presume, just like a child is the parents are responsible for the first 18 years of life. You would hope that the mother would be responsible for those decisions for the first 9 months, but we have several states that are saying that's not true. She's losing the right for the first 9 months, and then she's responsible for the next 18 after that. But for these first 9 months, it's politicians or that are taking charge of her body. So Any input, any comments you have on that, Kris?
Well, from the get-go, my first thought is every child that's born should be wanted.
Absolutely.
Because I can't imagine being born into a family that did not want me, that made me feel like excess baggage. How is that child going to turn out to be a responsible, productive member of society if everything that they experience as an infant and a child is, I don't want you. You don't belong here. You shouldn't be here. So that's my first thought. And the other thing is every woman who sacrifices her body to grow a baby should be a parent by choice, not by force.
Exactly.
Otherwise, anything else is a breach of human rights, and it's a form of human slavery. It's a form of animal husbandry, saying, I don't need your consent for this to happen. And especially when you figure out that every 68 seconds there is someone in the U.S. is sexually assaulted. Everybody says, well, it's up to the women to keep their legs closed. Well, that is not often what it takes, because there's force, there's rape, there's incest, there's, at a very young ages, there's abuse that a child doesn't even necessarily know this isn't right. This shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking of all of the many, many millions of occasions where a woman will find out. Another thing that really bothers me about this is that they often jump into the red herring of, but the baby at 6 or 7 or 8 months old will get aborted. Most kids that far along, most children that far along are wanted children. They probably have their names picked, they're gender identified, their rooms painted, their nurseries put together in anticipation of this coming event. And then they find out that something is terribly wrong. The mother's going to die, or the baby is going to be born with just unsurvivable birth defects that are unsustainable or will make their life a living hell. So the people who have abortions later in life are agonized when they do it. They wanted those children, okay? And before that point where they are fetuses and they aren't even capable of sustaining their own life, I think a woman should not be considered an owned being. They should have autonomy over their own bodies.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at.
The thing that I find unique is for most of us, we don't realize that abortion was not an issue in this country until maybe 100 years ago.
That's correct.
When a few states started just to decide that they wanted to protect human life. Mm-hmm. And back then, it was a Catholic issue.
Yes.
It was not a Protestant issue, and it wasn't about abortion. It was about contraceptives.
Correct.
And
I think the next step will be contraceptives. The next step beyond that can be, hey, if we can tell women what to do with their bodies, why not rescind the vote?
Yeah.
Why not just make them own beings again? Because it's been a little over 100 years since we've had the right to vote.
Right.
And if all of this is, that wasn't in the Constitution, there's a lot of things that weren't in the Constitution that we don't do anymore because we have evolved.
Right.
We have evolved, and we've decided all men are created equal equals all women are created equal. All beings are created equal. We need to all, have the same rights and responsibilities. Because when you have rights, you also have responsibilities.
Yeah. The experience is finally being realized. Or the experiment.
We're on the verge of it. We have never fully achieved it. The Equal Rights Amendment has not been passed, or we wouldn't even be having this discussion about abortion. Women would have the equal right to say what to do with their bodies, but right now, apparently, they don't.
Yeah. And one of the things most people probably don't realize either is that Roe v. Wade was not about abortion. It was about a woman's right over her own body.
Correct.
This was about equal rights.
It's healthcare.
Not about a medical procedure.
Correct. Absolutely.
But it's been turned into a medical procedure because
politically. it can turn into a political football.
Right. Yeah.
Because believe me, there are passionate people on both sides of the thing. And I've always say, look, if you don't believe in abortion, don't have one.
Yeah.
But you can't tell somebody else what to do. They are intimately involved. No one who has an abortion necessarily wants an abortion. They need to, for some physical, emotional, spiritual, financial, or some other reason, to not bring a child into the world.
Right.
And if they don't feel capable of doing it, they shouldn't be forced to do it.
Because this is an issue of a right over a woman's body, there are all kinds of other related issues that are now up in the air. Like, we talked about civil rights, but directly related to abortion, we now have the issue of children in those states that where the parent realized they couldn't afford to raise the child or keep the child, having to make a decision related to it. Now they have to own that child for 18 years when they don't have the capability of doing that.
Correct.
So we're realizing that there's a default to a huge increase in foster care.
And in some states, it is legal for you at birth to give the child to the hospital and say, I can't afford, I don't want, whatever. But then that child goes into the foster care system. And as we all know, the foster care system needs help. It needs redemption really right away, because a lot of those children end up feeling shuttled back and forth, unloved, unsupported, uncherished, and they end up, and then they get tossed out at age 18, figure it out.
Yeah.
So, that's not a solution. It's absolutely, it's not a solution. It's like scapegoating. It's like, we'll put them over there and let somebody else figure it out.
Right.
Yeah.
Another thing I think about is a woman's ability to improve her life.
Correct.
That is something that is at great risk, because we used to talk about keeping a woman barefoot and pregnant. Mm-hmm. And with this Roe v. Wade out of the way, that's a whole lot easier.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And that, which means that we have welfare rolls are going to swell, which is scary.
When you're responsible for 24/7, 365 care of an infant, you can't afford to go out and work, because basically whatever it costs for childcare in most states will take all the money you make, and you just end up in this endless cycle of poverty and frustration and feeling criminal, or ashamed because I can't stay home and take care of my child. And even if I do go out and make a living, it all goes to childcare. And ideally, I would have liked him in home to take care of my child, but I couldn't financially afford that. So it's just a big vicious loop if you can't advance yourself. And in today's economy, where everybody wants to, work people part-time and not give them health benefits and stuff like that, and they won't give you a regular schedule at a lot of these places where they only work you part-time, you can't piecemeal a full schedule, because you might work nights one week and days the next week, and you can't come up with a schedule that will work where you can work 2 or more jobs in order to keep your head above water. It's a nightmare. The whole idea is just a nightmare waiting to unravel. And all of the bad things that can happen, they aren't just nightmare, they aren't red herrings. This is very real consequences of this decision.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think about one of the issues that has been raised with abortion is the father's rights.
Oh my gosh, in 31 states, rapists can get custody and visitation rights to the offspring of their victims. What does that do to the victim?
Oh yeah, wow.
You can come and visit the child of the rape that you perpetrated on me. Talk about an emotional crazy,
Is there an obligation in that case for them to be contributing to the household before they have?
I haven't looked at each of the laws. I don't know what they are. They can actually take the child away from the woman. They can sue to take the child away from the woman. Yeah, they can gain custody or visitation rights in 31 states.
Wow.
And it's like, and I heard one woman who had decided, even though she was raped, I guess it was raped by an intimate familiar, she decided to carry the child, but then he sued for custody. And she thought, if I had known that that option was even available, I may have had an abortion, because he's not somebody I would want raising a child.
Yeah. Wow.
Somebody who rapes me is not going to be terribly trustworthy to treat anybody else decently.
Yeah. That kind of reminds me, we've been watching a series on fundamentalist Mormons, and where the leader of the fundamentalist Mormons takes 12-year-olds into the back of the Mormon tabernacle or sanctuary, and performs sex on these 12-year-olds to teach them how to be to do sexual activity, so that he can marry them off to some other 40, 50, 6-year-old men.
Correct. Yeah.
And it's just so sad, so sick.
Absolutely.
That this sexual perversion is given any grounds at all in a child's life. I mean, we've seen our culture get messed up already with the stuff that they're exposed to, and that just makes it worse, that's kind of a weird thing to say, because all of that is stuff that's been an active part of our past.
It absolutely has. Yeah.
And it's created the culture that we live in today, and we're trying to get on top of it. And now they wanted to return that back. And that's been a corrupting influence in this culture, and probably one of the worst things that has messed us up in the present day, creating all kinds of people who need to go to counseling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So another thing, of course, I guess I did bring this up, was poverty. We have such a reaction to the government taking money out of our pockets for social programs.
Yeah. We
don't want to give anything to struggling families, because, we like to quote that scripture, "He who does not work should not eat." That's really what that scripture was all about.
Right.
But it's just returning us to the age of the haves have everything and the have-nots die on the street.
Yes. And that I wouldn't call that civilization. That's not what civilization is. Civilization is taking care of the least of these. There are some people who are seriously too poor to work. Yeah. They can't afford, they're living on the street, they're homeless, they're living in their cars, they can't afford to put gas in their car to go to work.
Yeah.
And they say, well, you should be working. Well, and if you're living in your car or homeless, how do you take a shower to even make yourself presentable to be able to go to work and apply for a job? Mm-hmm. And all of these people are falling through the cracks saying, well, they're lazy or they're addicted, or a lot of the addiction comes from the fact that they become hopeless and they try to self-medicate just to not, either off themselves or somebody else in fits of panic, anxiety, and despair. Mm-hmm. If you lose hope, you're going to turn to either, suicide or some way to survive that. Hopelessness is a horrible, horrible thing.
Yeah.
And so we just don't seem to say, can you walk a mile in their shoes? And I watched programs on homelessness, and there are people who are working full time who are living in their cars. They can't afford rent.
Yeah.
They can't afford a mortgage because they don't get paid enough. They're piecemealing these part-time jobs together. So it's a systemic issue. We are not putting enough money toward the people who truly need it, while the big corporations and the rich folks get subsidies. They don't pay taxes, but they get billions and billions in subsidies. Our tax dollars going to help these people who don't need
corporate welfare.
Help. Yeah. I mean, talk about socialism for the rich.
Mm-hmm.
All of our money goes in that direction, and none of their money comes back to the people who actually help them build their empires.
Right.
They feed them, pay them the least they can possibly get away with, which is why the fight for $15 won't sustain you anymore. They've been fighting for $15 for 10 years.
Yeah.
And now they have $15 in Seattle, and people can't afford to live in Seattle on $15 an hour. They need $30 an hour because of the rent. So it's this constant battle to give people the value of their service, the value. Somebody working at McDonald's for an hour, putting food out the window at $10 a pop, is earning a lot of money for whoever that is. And they're getting, maybe now, if they're really lucky, $15 an hour. Well, they make that much in about a minute and a half at the drive-through.
Right.
So I just think it's gotten to the point where the haves are just reaping so much more than they should from the labor of other people's labor.
Yeah, on that issue, I've always felt that people should be paid in relationship to what the company brings in.
Absolutely.
There should be there should be some rules about how much more money the owner can make as opposed to his workers. Basically,
if you can't afford to pay your workers well enough for them to have a roof over their head and meals on the table, you have a hobby. You do not have a business.
Right.
FDR said the minimum wage wasn't just a starting minimum wage. It was a wage that the average person should be able to put a roof over their head and food on the table with.
Yeah.
It wasn't a starter job. It was the job that could sustain them.
Right.
And that was back in the day. So
and that's
we haven't kept pace with the amount of productivity that has happened because of computerization and everything. Now they're making money hand over fist, and the people who are actually doing the work, the worker bees, are getting peanuts for their contribution to their employer success.
Right.
Yeah.
I often wondered how much more could these employers make if they cared for their people.
And how much better how less would the turnover be?
Exactly.
If you treat people right, there's the gentleman, I think he has a company, I think it's called Gravity in Seattle. He decided 8 or 10 years ago, he was going to pay everybody, secretary on up, $60,000 or $65,000 a year. Well, everybody laughed him out of the, social media thing, laughed and laughed and laughed. Well, this guy has done nothing but great things, and the people have stayed with him the whole time. And he's very, very well known for being, you treat people right, they will treat you right. They will work their buns off for you. Yeah. And they can afford to put money in savings, and they can afford to have a health plan if, of course, I'm sure the health plan is covered too on top of that. But if not, they can afford health insurance and that stuff like that. You have to pay people. There's also something called, a sense of dignity with what you're doing. Mm-hmm. If you're investing your time doing something and you're being paid really poorly, it takes away from your sense of dignity and self-esteem. And it's like, I'm busting my buns and I can't keep a roof over my head, that causes hopelessness and causes people to start self-medicating, and then it just all goes downhill from there.
Yeah. We seem to be in a society that does not like the idea of being accountable to anybody but ourselves.
That's it.
And I think that's
I got
really
mine.
what's
Good
behind
luck
all of us.
I got mine. Good luck with yours.
Yeah.
And back in the day, the mantra was kind of like, I'm up here now. I'm going to reach back and help you up. Pay it forward, kind of thing. I had help to get where I am. I'm going to help you get where you are. And back in the day, if you worked at Boeing, my gosh, they buried you. I mean, at the end of your life, they treated you like a king. They buried you. They paid your funeral expenses. They did all of these things to make you feel like you were part of their family, a beloved, very contributory part of the family. And that kind of stuff seems to have gone away. The bigger a corporation gets, the more you become a number, and the less I can pay, the more I can make. And it just, I think you've heard the thing that most villages are very, very successful until they get to about 150 people, because 150 people can get to know each other and care about each other. And the larger it gets, the harder it is to really
to know each other.
Yeah. And so you begin to get a little more immune to the suffering of the people beyond your, in quotes, tribe or your village. And that's where it starts to fall apart. We have to maintain that, or we do not have a civilization.
Right. And that's a huge thing in society, is we are very me-oriented, but a society cannot survive without we.
That's correct.
And we have a critical shortage of understanding the we.
Correct.
And
they try to, and a lot of the politicians will try to put you in silos. If you're LGBTQ, you're not part of the cis.
Yeah.
If you're male, you're not part of the female. Well, we all have a balance of male and female in us.
Yeah.
And they try to separate us into these different silos where we can't get together and work together. That's beginning to change now. A lot of the politicians are saying, look, we need to get out of our silos and get together and say, okay, I will be at your rally and you will be at my rally, and we will, make the rallies bigger and larger and less easy to ignore.
Right.
But then you wonder, the big corporations that are running the media, are they even covering those big rallies? Which rallies are they covering? Which rallies are getting 24/7 coverage? And that will tell you the story about where the big networks stand.
Right.
They're also selling a narrative, and it's not necessarily a civilized one. It's we can make money. We make money watching people war against each other.
Right. And that, you hit it on the head. That's one of the things that I think all of us are ticked off about the media about, is that it's the almighty dollar that drives their coverage.
And the thing is, if a politician says this, which is a fact, and a politician says this, which is a bald-faced lie, they give them both equal coverage without saying this is true and this is a bald-faced lie.
Right.
Very often. And then the lower information people, voters who don't know what to believe will start to go, well, I resonate more with this emotionally, Yeah. And also a lot of, on both sides, they prey on your emotions.
Yeah. My wife just brought up the point. It used to be the FCC required
fairness, right?
Fairness on both sides of political aisle.
Fairness doctrine. If somebody went on TV and made this statement, the opposing party or the party with the other side of the coin, got an equal amount of time. So if you spoke for 15 minutes, they spoke for 15 minutes. That was back in the day with Walter Cronkite and the guys that said, and that's the way it is today. They didn't tell you what to think. They told you what happened and let you decide what to think. But when the the 24/7 cable news stuff came on that breaking news every 5 minutes, that's when everything started to go, well, we have to keep feeding this monster.
Right. But
so that's when it started to get talking heads and here's what happened and here's what you should think about what happened.
Right. Well, is that rule no longer in effect?
It is no longer in effect.
That's what I thought.
Doctrine, President Reagan took it up.
Repealed it. That's okay. Yes. I thought that's what it was. My wife wasn't sure, but I thought it had been repealed. And I think that's the base of that. That's when we really went south.
We absolutely
was when that stuff went away. And, actually, you brought up the LGBTQIA community.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what that means?
Oh, yes. That's any community that is not what we consider, in quotes, common. In other words, men think they're men, women believe they're women, cisgender, they feel comfortable in their own body, they are heterosexual, they are attracted to the opposite gender. Well, the LGBTQIA community stands for lesbian, bisexual, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. The transgender is the only thing in that has nothing to do with sex orientation. That's gender orientation. LGBTQ. Q is questioning or queer. I is intersex, people who are born, they used to be called hermaphrodites. They were born with ambiguous genitalia. They couldn't really determine whether they were boys or girls at birth. Very often those people were altered without their consent as infants so they could be raised one gender or the other, even though their brains might be the opposite gender of what they were assigned. And A is asexual, meaning having no sexual inclinations at all. And plus is pansexual, which is kind of like I fall in, or I can become hormonally induced by male or female or anybody that I feel so completely in tune with, like a soulmate, that I could get turned on by them. The fact that someone is intimate with you in a way in your brain that you feel completely safe with them, then that can turn on hormones that cause people to say, yes, I could make love with you. I love you.
Yeah. Well,
so that's kind of what that acronym stands for.
Okay. Thank you very much. It really helps understand, because someone who has little or no exposure to that world, we keep seeing that acronym grow.
Yes.
And then oftentimes we're wondering, okay, well, what's that letter referencing? And what's that letter referencing?
Absolutely. Yes.
And I know that equal rights and recognizing rights, they talk about intersectionality. Because some people are they receive the bias against a racial group,
or
some people receive the bias against a sexual orientation or a gender. And then intersectionality is when you get multiple issues coming at you at the same time. Explain that a little bit.
I also want to add one more thing. In the Native American, before Christianity came to America, the many Native American tribes had something called two-spirit people. They were considered very, very highly evolved people because they were almost the beautiful yin-yang split between male and female. There were men who were very feminine and wanted to do women-oriented things. They were still men. They were still heterosexual men, but their gifting was in things that women did. And there were women whose gifting was as a warrior, as a protector, as a defender. And these people were considered, they're called two-spirit because they were considered the perfect amalgamation of what a well-rounded person would be. I am a protector. I'm a defender, a protector, a nurturer, a this, that, and the other thing. I am a well-rounded. So they also felt they had the brain to be able to understand both hemispheres, both genders perfectly. And a lot of times you'll hear men bad-mouthing women or women bad-mouthing men. That's because they kind of don't have enough of the opposite gender in, or they've had really bad experiences. Right. And people have treated them crummy.
I don't want to take over what you're saying, but I wanted to just add something in here.
Okay.
But I recently, in my studies about the early church, the first 400 years, the writings from that time period show us that the concept of sexuality was radically different than we currently have. We have hardwired a lot of behavioral stuff to a set of genitalia.
Right.
They didn't have that distinction back then.
They didn't, and most cultures do not.
It was a behavioral continuum. Regardless of what the genitalia was, there was a behavioral continuum.
Yes.
And so, like if we were ever to read stories of the early martyrs of Christianity, many of the women who were martyred are remembered in our generation as men because they had the courage, they had all of those male related behaviors, and calling them a man was an honorary thing to do.
Accolade. And calling someone a woman or the P word is actually diminutive and the opposite.
Right.
It's marginalizing them and minimizing them. So, during World War II, there was a famous, they thought, male doctor who was going to the battlefields and taking care of people. Well, when this person died, they obviously took their clothes off and found out it was a woman who had a transgender woman who had donned the apparel of men, gone out and do it. And he had already won the medals. So they took them away for a while because women don't get medals.
Right.
And then about 10, 20 years ago after, they said, that's baloney.
Yeah.
He believed himself to be a man. He acted as a man. They gave the medal back.
Yeah.
So it just seems like we have this culture of minimizing what women do and undervaluing what they do. How much would it cost, childcare? You know how much childcare costs if the woman has to work outside the house, but what would the value of 24/7, 365-day childcare, what we called motherhood back in the day, what would the value of that be? Not just the value of the working hours, including overtime, but the value of what they instilled in their children to make them productive citizens of the world. It's incalculable, the value of a nurturing woman, absolutely incalculable. And yet we minimize it, we marginalize, we pay them less than. You want a job, get a job as a babysitter.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. And that's where we go off the rails. Again, it's the fact that women are not treated or valued equally for the services they render.
Right.
That men are.
Right. And you had mentioned earlier about transgender being about gender, not sex.
Yes. To me, the best way I can explain this is sexual orientation is who you want to go to bed with. It's about who you want to go to bed with, sexual orientation. Gender orientation is about who you want to go to bed as. Okay. So a transgender male like me From the earliest times, I don't think this is too graphic to share, but from the earliest time when I would go into a movie and I would see a romantic interlude between a male and female, I wasn't experiencing that as a viewer from the female's perspective. I was experiencing it from the male's perspective because I have a male brain. Mm-hmm. And I realized that I don't have the equipment to do what my brain tells me I should do, okay, yeah. Or how I should do that thing. So, and here's another, okay, so lesbian, that is a sexual orientation. That means women in love with women, women loving women. They both are cisgender. They both love their bodies, appreciate their bodies just as they are. They are experiencing that intimacy in the way that feels right to them. Mm-hmm. With transgender, you can experience intimacy, but it doesn't feel like right. It isn't. It is the equipment isn't there. That kind of
awkward.
Stuff. Yes, awkward. Yeah.
And that you explaining that helps me understand why the whole issue, these issues are now an issue when they weren't previously.
Because nobody talked about them. People felt ashamed. The earliest I ever heard about transgender, I was about 12 or 13, and I read a book called Conundrum by Jan Morris, who was transgender. Back then they said transsexual because he changed he got the surgery to transfer from a male to a female.
Yeah.
And I remember reading it and crying and crying and crying because I felt so like, I get that. I didn't yet realize, I knew from the time I was little, I always knew I was a boy. Okay. I just always knew it. No one told me anything. And then when puberty came along, it just threw me for a complete loop, an absolute nightmare. It was like being planted on an island with headhunters and expected. Now I expect you to start behaving like a woman because I'd never acted like a woman. I had always been, that they called it a tomboy. I had always been a boy.
Yeah.
And then now they want me to be this. And they told me I had 4 careers. I could be a wife, a mother, a nurse, or a teacher. Those were my options.
Or a prostitute.
Or a prostitute, yeah. If you want to make a lot of money, be a prostitute, So, and because all of those other jobs didn't pay very well, again, you needed a husband to help make the thing happen for you to be able to afford to, have a decent life. Right. So, I often put myself in the place, if I was not transgender, could I understand what that is, and I probably couldn't.
Yeah.
I probably could not. So I don't fault people for not understanding, but I if I have any fault at all, it's like, don't you tell me who I am. I know who I am.
Yeah.
Any more than I would question your ascertainment of who you are. Don't be telling me that I'm something I'm not.
Right. And you were the one who made me aware that there was such an entity as queer theory. Mm-hmm. And my understanding, and then correct me if I'm wrong on that, is that queer theory is that humanity, regardless of the genitalia you were born with, mentally there's a continuum between the feminine and the masculine, and we all fit in a different place on that continuum. Mm-hmm. And this is not a bipolar thing. Or not,
right.
Bipolar is not the right word. What's when somebody doesn't see things male, female, what's that called?
Dichotomy?
No, there's a term that
I don't remember. I don't know.
My brain is not remembering the term right now.
Okay.
It's bi something. But anyway, so am I correct in that?
Yeah.
That they fit some different places on the continuum? Queer
and questioning people, in my experience, are people who say, I don't feel either male or female. Mm-hmm. I don't. And there are people who feel, sometimes I feel very feminine, sometimes I feel very masculine. And so a lot of times they ask to be regarded as they. because they don't know where they fit on that spectrum between.
That's where I've seen people self-identifying as they, and I wonder
they and them.
Okay.
Yeah, they and them, because it's like, I'm not a he. I'm not always a he. I'm not always. I have a problem because I've only recently come out as transgender, I would say in the last 7 years. And almost all of my family still refers to me as she, and I do it sometimes too. But I also notice I also do it culturally. For example, if I'm caring for or nurturing somebody, I'm mom cat, And so basically I have adopted my cultures think that if you're nurturing and loving and caring, that's female. That's not true.
Right.
It is absolutely not true. And if you're strong, forceful, and powerful, that's male. That is not true. That is absolutely not true. In
not
many other cultures,
not on a genitalia related.
Correct.
Continuing, but
because in many other cultures, there were female matriarchs. There were instead of men being the rulers, women were the rulers.
Right.
So we seem to be a little stuck on our own biases and our own culture. This is the way it should be, and nobody else should be telling me anything different. Well, I got news. Things are different.
Yeah.
And the sooner we can embrace that, as long as nobody's hurting anybody, love is love. As long as it's between consenting adults, love is love. Yeah. And I'm just to the point where I'm tired of hating, and I'm tired of hearing about hate. I'm tired of hearing about the silos, because I know to the core of my being that all of us are way more alike than we are different.
Right.
And as long as we continue to remember that, even the things that we find odious in other beings, we can find some of in ourselves.
Yeah.
And those things that make us feel respectful and honoring of other people is in us, or we wouldn't recognize it.
Right. It was a huge wake-up call when I was reading Genesis, the creation account, and realized that in the creation of the days, he talks about light and dark, talks about the sky and the sea, and all this other stuff. And all of a sudden it made me realize, wait a minute, the creation account is teaching a continuum, the two ends of a continuum. And every single one of those days is a new continuum that's introduced. Then it gets to creating man, and I realized, why would he change gears from creating creation to creating man? And I realized, whoa, that is a whole new way of looking at the creation story. And it makes so much more sense, because if you think of it as exact, then you think of the creation story as a naive story. Because we clearly know there are all kinds of animals that were not mentioned in the creation story.
Correct. Yeah.
And so they shouldn't exist because that story didn't mention it. What I'm saying. But yeah,
and the only animal mentioned in the creation story is a serpent, which comes in to cause a rift between Adam and Eve.
Right.
And it's like, oh boy, so now we are going to say that nature itself is something we must find some way to dominate and control. The term dominion, by the way, biblically does not mean domination. It means shepherd, stewardship. It means being a good shepherd. It does not mean go out there with your sword and whack away at it.
It means taking responsibility to make sure everything works the way it's supposed to.
We are the
everything is
only
working together.
species. We are the only species on this planet that can violate it so badly that we can destroy it.
Right.
And so we have an enormous responsibility.
That's the God part of the human experience, is that we God created us to be his hands and feet and all of that here on earth, because we have the ethical and the moral potential to be able
to know what's
monitor
right
this
and
thing.
to do it. To know what's right and to do what's right.
Right.
Instead of becoming greedy and selfish and
Right.
pulling it apart and creating lines, invisible lines in the desert, and saying, okay, now this is your country and this is my country.
Yeah.
We need to establish the fact that we are all on this very, very small blue dot
Together.
in the middle of an enormous cosmos. I think it was Edwin, I think his last name was Edmund, an astronaut. He was on the moon and he looked back at Earth and he said, I would just like to take every politician I know by the scruff of the neck and bring him up here and say, look at that, you SOB. That's what it's all about. That's
Hey,
all.
watch your language.
That's all we have. That I didn't give you the acronym. I didn't give you the acronym, you know?
I know.
That's all we have.
Yeah.
And if we aren't taking good care of it and good care of each other,
Yes.
I'm sorry. That's not what God or that's not what was intended with the
Right.
brains we were given to
Right.
make civilization.
Yeah.
Civil.
No, part of the reason why I wanted you to explain all of that was, we've got all kinds of issues related to the disappearance of Roe v. Wade, and some of which we haven't even talked about yet.
Correct.
Are there issues that many of us might not be aware of, that the LGBTQIA community are looking at?
If you want to stay with Roe v. Wade and the LGBTQIA, vastly far more numbers of LGBTQIA people are attacked, assaulted sexually. I will fix you. You believe this, I'm going to fix that. And a huge number of it's much more prevalent in communities where people think, I'm going to educate you. We're going to get this right.
It's kind of like the reason why you are not thinking straight is because you haven't had the right man in your life to.
Yes, let's just make this happen
Okay.
so you can. Yeah, and if you don't, and if you fight it, then you get beat up. So, and it's that just the sexual assault statistics between cisgender heterosexual people and others is enormous. The difference in the number of times they're attacked, belittled, assaulted, and not hired or fired once they found out that they're in, and not just in Christian circles. I mean, just generally, if you put a picture, now with Pete Buttigieg and his husband, back in the day, if you had a spouse of the same sex, you didn't put their picture on your desk at work. Mm-hmm. That was something that you didn't do because it could risk your livelihood.
That was always your roommate. Right.
Yeah. So
your best friend, not your lover.
Right. So there's just about everything you see in the cisgender. And cisgender means a person who feels completely comfortable in their own body. Mm-hmm. That's all cisgender means.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Transgender just means across genders.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And that comes from, I think, biology or physics. Cis and trans was borrowed from another, I think, biology.
Okay.
Biology. Science, some kind of, to say alike and different. So cisgender means I feel comfortable who I am. Mm-hmm. Transgender is I feel comfortable who I am as another gender than the one I was assigned at birth.
Right.
or
Now,
assumed to be at birth.
Yeah. Now, another one of the things I just wanted to bring up was the Declaration of Clarence Thomas.
Oh,
That
yes.
that the next things to go after, you referenced this, was contraceptives and gay rights.
And you'll notice he kept strangely silent about the loving versus where interracial marriage, because he is in an interracial marriage.
Yeah,
you know?
well, conveniently so, because he's supposed to be an originalist.
Yes, I know that.
And an originalist believes that the only correct interpretation of the Constitution is the way the founding fathers viewed it.
And
he can't be on the Supreme Court.
That's absolutely right.
Him.
That's absolutely right. And women can't vote. I mean, if you want to go back to the original intent, people could be owned, women couldn't vote. Amy Coney Barrett could not be on the Supreme Court because she's a woman. She would be an owned entity. It's insane. And the other thing is, I will admit that at the founding of our nation, there were racist people at the head of them who were slave owners and who treated their women horribly. They're women. They owned them. A woman couldn't even get a credit card in her own name until 1974.
Yeah.
Yeah. So until we got voting rights and started clawing our way up to equality, it was everything was decided by, we didn't own property. The right of inheritorship always fell to the male. Women had to be taken care of, to be taken care of. They would starve otherwise or be prostitutes. Which is kind of where a lot of men want them to be. And I think they want them to be back there. Yeah. And women are saying, not going there, not going there.
Yeah.
You're not going to give me fewer rights than my mother and my grandmother had. Yeah. We're just not going there.
And it's that tribal thing,
Yep.
The leader group. Well, that's not tribal. That's caste. That's a caste system.
They keep calling us a classless society. That's just baloney. We are not a classless society. Yeah.
We've just redefined the concept of class.
That's correct. Yeah.
So it's not as rigid,
right,
as other nations.
But it's nearly
we're trying to keep it rigid.
Nearly as odious, and they really seem to want to return us back to a time when men had all the power and women just,
That's what it means for America to be great.
Yes, absolutely.
So, with Clarence Thomas's announcement, it appears that there's all kinds of other things that are slated.
On shopping block.
What? I mean, I was listening on the radio to the whole concept of the judicial system. In this country, there was always, from the foundation, there was division of power. So Congress had control of the money. Who else could have control of the money? Right. The president had control of the military, the might arm. And then the judicial system was applying the rules that had already been put in place.
Correct.
And it was the whole concept of the judicial system has been morphing throughout American history. It has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger. And before we had a Supreme Court, the judicial system already had a problem of being political.
Oh, yes.
And once we gained the Supreme Court, they at least tried to pretend like there wasn't a political agenda behind it. Now, they're openly declaring a political agenda.
We have a white supremacist society.
Yes.
I mean, we have had one all along, and those of us who don't believe in it, white, black, and every color in between, are trying to dismantle it and make it go away because it's not fair. And in America, the least you should expect is fairness.
Do you think the 51% or more are still white supremacist? Or do you think
I think there are fewer. I think they are bolder and more. Remember, they used to hide under Ku Klux Klan hoods because they knew that, it was, although they believed it, they didn't necessarily want to be identified because they could be, taken to court for killing people.
Yeah.
Now they're just open. I mean, you saw Charlottesville, open and in your face, and they're no longer afraid. And that's this, in a way, that's good. At least you can see what it is, where it hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
Mark Twain said a most wonderful thing when he was 75. He said, people call me a pessimist in my old age. I'm not. I am an optimist who did not arrive. And that's how I felt when I was a kid.
Yeah.
When I was a kid and I saw policemen turning police dogs and fire hoses on black people, I asked my mother, because I was naive, I said, Mother, what country is that? And she said, that's our country. I could not believe it. I literally could. And from that moment, I became an advocate. I said, that is insane. You don't treat people like that. I don't care what color they are. You don't treat people like that. That kind of. And the other thing quote I often think of is, you've made God in your own image when he hates the same people you do.
I love it.
Yeah, because we shouldn't be hating anybody.
Yeah. And I see we are on the countdown now.
Yes, we are. Okay.
That
went fast.
Is there, in a minute or less, is there any last minute points you'd like to make?
I think I made them all. I really do. Yeah.
Well, there's way more than I'd like to say, but I'm not going to open that can of worms because we're not going to get it addressed in this amount of time.
There are many cans of worms still to be open, Pastor Dennis. And
yes.
And I would love to have Kris back in another show. Once Jasmine gets better, it's a tremendous host. But thank you so much for taking over today, Pastor. We really appreciate it, and we send nothing but good vibes to Jasmine for her Zoom. How do you say that? Get better. Recoup. Okay.
I'll think of it in a minute.
Okay, excellent. So unfortunately we have to switch to the next show, but we will be back soon with more of this conversation here at Siembra Radio Show.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invite.